You think universal love is naive. Not because you are cynical, because you have watched how people actually behave. The in-group preference that human beings display even when they're trying not to. The natural priority given to family, tribe, nation. The concentric circles of care that diminish in proportion to distance. You know about universal love as an aspiration. You suspect it is an aspiration in the way that most aspirations are aspirations. Something to gesture toward while doing the actual work of the actual world, which runs on narrower loyalties and harder calculations. MOD, known to history as Mozi, Master Mo, was a 5th and 4th century BC Chinese philosopher who argued against exactly this suspicion. Not by appealing to sentiment, not by claiming that universal love is what good people feel, by arguing that it is the only rational policy available to anyone who has actually thought through the consequences of the alternative. His argument is not idealism. It is engineering, and it is among the most rigorous and most neglected philosophical positions in the history of Chinese thought. The problem that Mozi is addressing begins with a diagnosis that is hard to argue with. Most of the suffering in the world, most of the war, the poverty, the injustice, the exploitation, does not come from people doing evil for the sake of evil. It comes from people preferring their own at the expense of others. The general who orders the destruction of a city prefers his lord's interests to the lives of the city's inhabitants. The official who accepts a bribe prefers his family's wealth to the people he was appointed to serve. The stronger state that conquers the weaker one prefers its own expansion to the other state's autonomy. The employer who pays below subsistence wages prefers his profit to his workers' survival. In every case, the form of the preference is the same. I value mine more than yours. The concentric circles, the narrowing love, the loyalty that diminishes with distance until it becomes indifference, and indifference at sufficient scale becomes atrocity. Mozi looked at this pattern and asked a question that sounds simple and is not. What would happen if everyone reversed it? If instead of preferring their own at the expense of others, they extended the same regard to the stranger that they currently extend to the family, the same regard to the distant state that they extend to their own? His answer is the argument that makes him unique in the Chinese philosophical tradition. The reversal would not require heroic sacrifice. It would not require that people become saints. It would require only that they be consistently rational about their own self-interest across a longer time horizon. Because the world in which everyone practices Jian AI, universal, undifferentiated love, is a world that is better for everyone, including the people who currently benefit most from the asymmetric love. And the world in which everyone practices partial love is a world that tends toward the mutual destruction that Mozi watched happening in the warring states period around him. Mozi was born around 470 BC, probably in the state of Lu, the same state that produced Confucius, though from a very different social position. Where Confucius came from the educated nobility, Mozi came from the artisan class. He was a craftsman, possibly a carpenter, possibly a military engineer, and the specificity of this origin shapes the entire philosophy. He is interested in what works, what produces results, what actually, demonstrably, in the measurable world, improves the condition of the people who need improving. He founded the Mohist school, which at its height was one of the two most significant philosophical movements in China, comparable in influence and organization to the Confucian school, its primary intellectual rival. The Mohists were not only thinkers. They were engineers, military specialists, and political advisors who offered their services to states that were willing to practice defensive warfare rather than aggressive expansion. They were pacifists in the specific Mohist sense, not opposed to all defense, but absolutely opposed to aggressive war, which they analyzed as the most large-scale expression of partial love, my state's interests over your state's lives. The school declined after the unification of China under the Qin dynasty in 221 BC, and Mohism was largely suppressed in favor of Confucianism during the Han dynasty. It was rediscovered by Chinese scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries, and its arguments about logic, epistemology, and political philosophy have attracted serious academic attention in recent decades. What the rediscovery found was a philosophical tradition that is, in some respects, more contemporary than anything produced in classical China. Rigorously empirical, deeply concerned with the practical consequences of philosophical positions, and organized around a vision of human welfare that takes seriously the interests of every human being rather than those of the cultivated elite. The philosophy, the Jian AI argument, stated carefully. Jian AI is usually translated as universal love or inclusive care. The Chinese is instructive. Jian means comprehensive, inclusive, undifferentiated, the love that does not distinguish in its basic regard between self and other, near and far, kin and stranger. AI means love, care, concern. Jian AI is the comprehensive, undifferentiated care that extends to every person regardless of their relation to you. Mozi's argument for it is not, this is what morality requires. It is, this is what rationality requires, once you have thought through the consequences. The argument runs roughly as follows. If I want to be cared for, and everyone wants to be cared for, this is the baseline. Then the most reliable way to produce that outcome is to be in a world in which people care for each other comprehensively. A world of partial love is a world in which I will be cared for by those who consider me theirs and abandoned or harmed by those who do not. A world of Jian AI is a world in which I will be cared for by everyone, from a purely self-interested calculation across a sufficiently long time horizon. The world of Jian AI is better for me than the world of partial love, even though the world of Jian AI requires me to care for people who are not mine. This is the move that makes Mozi unusual. He is not asking you to transcend self-interest. He is asking you to calculate self-interest correctly across a longer time horizon, with a clearer view of what the alternative actually produces. The partial love that feels rational in the short term, favoring mine over yours, produces a world that is systematically worse for everyone, including mine. The universal love that feels irrational as a personal sacrifice produces a world that is systematically better for everyone, including mine. He supports this with empirical observation, states that practice aggressive expansion, that treat other states' resources as available for their taking, generate the enmity and the wars that destroy them. Rulers who exploit their people, who treat the people's labor as available for their private enrichment, generate the instability that eventually ends their rule. The partial love is not only morally wrong, it is strategically stupid. It produces the outcomes that damage the very interests it was trying to protect. The counterargument that Mozi takes seriously, and that the Confucians made explicitly, is that Jian AI is impossible. That human beings are constitutionally incapable of extending the same care to the stranger that they extend to the family. That the concentric circles are not a choice, but a nature. Mozi's response is characteristically practical. You do not need to feel the same love for the stranger that you feel for your child. You need to act with the same regard for the stranger's basic interests that you would want others to act with toward your child. The feeling is not the point. The policy is the point. And a world organized around the policy of treating every person's basic interests as counting, not equally in emotional intensity, but equally in moral weight, is a world that produces demonstrably better outcomes than a world organized around the policy of treating only mine as counting. Now the bridge. Because Mozi was a 5th century BC Chinese philosopher addressing the specific political circumstances of the Warring States period, and most people watching this video are not. But here is what translates directly. The concentric circles of your own care, the people whose interests you naturally weight most heavily, whose suffering you feel most acutely, whose well-being you organize your moral attention around. And the people further out, the stranger, the distant community, the person whose life is affected by your choices and whose face you will never see. Mozi is not asking you to feel equally for both. He is asking you to think clearly about the consequences of the asymmetry. When the care diminishes at sufficient distance, the distant person's interests stop registering as morally real. They become statistical rather than human. And the policy that follows from treating distant suffering as less real than close suffering produces, at scale, exactly the patterns of exploitation and conflict that Mozi watched destroying the China of his time. The practical question he leaves for every person in every era is the same. Am I calculating my self-interest correctly? Am I accounting for the full consequences across the full time horizon, including the world my choices are producing for the people whose faces I cannot see, of the partial love I am currently practicing? Or am I optimizing for the short-term benefit of the inner circle while generating, at scale, the world that is worse for everyone, including the inner circle? Here is what Mozi asks of you, practically, today. First, name the outer circle honestly. The people whose interests your daily choices affect, but whose faces you do not see. The workers who produce the thing you are consuming. The community that absorbs the externalities of the industry you participate in. The distant people whose circumstances are shaped by the political choices you make or decline to make. Not to feel guilty about this, to see it. The partial love is invisible precisely because the outer circle is invisible. Naming it makes the choice visible. Second, extend one small act of regard past the inner circle. Not a dramatic sacrifice. One concrete act of care directed at someone outside the concentric circles of your natural regard. The donation made with genuine thought about who receives it rather than which cause produces the best social signal. The purchasing decision made with awareness of the labor conditions it supports. The political engagement directed at the interests of people who cannot reciprocate the support. This is Jian AI in its most available form. Not the transformation of the self into a saint, but the single act of extending the basic regard one circle further than it currently reaches. Third, apply the Mohist calculation to one policy position. Mozi's most rigorous practical tool, the consequentialist analysis of who benefits and who pays the cost of any given policy or practice. Take one position you currently hold about your workplace, your community, your political environment, and apply the full Mohist accounting. Who benefits? Who pays? Are the people who pay the cost inside your circle of natural regard or outside it? And if they're outside it, does that make the cost less real or only less visible? The Mohist calculation does not always change the conclusion, but it changes what the conclusion is based on. The policy arrived at through the full accounting is more defensible than the policy arrived at by assuming that only the inner circle's interests count. Fourth, treat one stranger's interests as counting. Once today, one encounter with a person outside your natural circle of care. A stranger, a service worker, a person encountered briefly in public, in which you extend the basic regard that you would want extended to someone you love. Not sentimentality. The straightforward, practical, entirely available act of treating their time, their dignity, and their basic interests as counting in the same way that yours do. This is the Mohist minimum, not the transformation of the entire moral psychology. The single act of the policy applied. The basic regard extended 1 degree further than the partial love would naturally take it. I want to close with the image that stays with me from the Mozi text. Not the elaborate logical arguments or the detailed discussions of military fortification. The craftsman. Mozi is always the craftsman. He approaches every philosophical problem the way a carpenter approaches a structural problem. What are the forces? What are the materials? What design will hold under the actual load it will bear? The world of partial love has been tried. It produces wars, exploitation, and the mutual destruction of the interests it was trying to protect. The design is failing under the load. What does the engineer propose instead? Jian, not because it is beautiful, because it works. Because a world in which the basic regard is extended to every person is a world that produces less of the catastrophic failure that the world of partial love keeps generating. The engineer does not ask you to feel differently. He asks you to build differently. And he shows you, with the patience of a craftsman who has studied the problem, why the building he is proposing will hold. The concentric circles feel natural. The argument that they produce is the argument of the world we have. And the world we have keeps failing in the predictable ways that Mozi predicted it would fail 25 centuries ago from a position of clarity about what the design was producing. The carpenter is still offering the alternative design. The question is whether we are willing to build it. Here is the question Mozi leaves us with today. Who is in your outer circle? The people whose interests your choices affect, but whose faces you do not see. And are you calculating the consequences of the partial love correctly, accounting for what it produces at scale, across the full time horizon, for everyone, including the people in your inner circle? And what is one act of the policy today? One extension of the basic regard 1 degree further than the natural care currently reaches? Leave that in the comments, because naming the outer circle is the beginning of seeing it, and seeing it is the beginning of the Mohist practice, the rational policy, the only design that actually holds. I'll see you in the next one.